killers. Welcome to Dallas. Sharks and gorillas. The girls, they going harder than Welcome to Dallas.
Hola, hola. ¿Cómo estás? Welcome back to the Poofy Man podcast. Mini pod edition. So today, bear with me if I have to run through it kind of quickly because there's a lot to cover in a short amount of time. What the fuck is that? So, since it's been flooding my freaking newsfeed all day, and it's all anyone seems to want to talk about, we're going to get into the Austin Metcalf, Carmelo Anthony imbroglio. So, with no further ado, let's get into it. So, first and foremost, I don't know if something changed today. It could, a lot went on today, and I've been trying not to spend too much time focusing on it, just trying to look up laws and things like that surrounding this case. But one thing people have been, pundits and stuff have been focused on, which is entirely incidental and not worth your while as far as proving intent to charge him with murder, is the fact that he had a knife in his bag. The knife is just is not a useful piece of evidence with regards to trying to prove intent. In the great state of Texas, you can be any age and buy a knife. Each outlet that sells knives, each knife dispensary has the right to, create their own internal regulations on who they, sell knives to. So you can be 3 years old if you find the right place. It's not illegal to have, so long as the knife doesn't have a blade that exceeds 5.5 inches, which in this case, it doesn't. So the fact that this young man had a knife in his bag doesn't necessarily prove anything other than he had a knife in his bag. Perhaps he likes fishing. Perhaps he works pulling cable with his dad and needs a knife to cut it. And it's just, there's not enough there. It doesn't mean that he didn't have the knife to do something bad with it. It just means that, is it possible that he did just have the knife in his bag? Yeah, it's possible. It's not strong evidence, so throw it away. This is not really about anything other than public and private spaces, how they're defined and how they're enforced, and how entry to them is enforced. So, in a UIL event, we have a situation where nobody who is not wearing, a fucking, certified, aficionado lanyard, or is not an athlete for one of the schools, is not allowed past the fence line. Everybody who's a spectator is there, and they're not allowed in there. The middle of the track is where everyone congregates. Each team usually props up a little tent, and that tends to be where they hang out and stuff. At least the ones I've been to, it seems kind of like a free-for-all. It's kind of a flowing event. I mean, it wasn't like there was enforcement that I remember. I mean, there's not even walls or anything, So there's that. I'm not sure how we define that. And the reason I'm even talking about it is because if in the defense, right, of Carmelo Anthony, if Carmelo Anthony can prove that he had a justifiable reason, a possible reason for being in the wrong tent when this incident took place, that's all he would need in order to at least, put a dent or at least destroy the entire murder charge itself. They would have to offer a plea down to a manslaughter case, and that's what they're probably going to do, and here's why. As it turns out, he did have a justifiable reason. I don't know if it is the reason, it's just one that is possible to be in this tent. This event took place in April, and if you live here, April is our rainiest month of the year. It is dead center in storm season. And just so happened that it was raining that day. Okay, so he's seeking shelter from the rain. But you might ask, why doesn't he use his own tent? Right? Why does he have to barge into other people's tent? He's trying to start shit. It's like, actually, he would have, except that they didn't have one. So he's without a tent, without shelter, and, it's possible that he's seeking refuge in the closest tent that he can find. There's also some witness statements, which I'm going to take kind of at a grain of salt, just because, with a grain of salt, because I don't really know how much you can put into those witness statements. But that said that he was also friends with people that were around that tent and stuff like that. In Austin Metcalf's tent is what I'm talking about. So regardless, he ends up in the tent, and this goes on for a while. Austin Metcalf, who for some reason has been deputized to, enforce like who's in whose tent, I guess. It seems like it might be the coach's job, but whatever. Comes in, tells him to leave. He says no. Go back and forth a little bit. There's maybe some words exchange. It starts to get a little disrespectful, during which time, obviously because he's in their designated team area, you can imagine that there's kind of like an ambush-sized, an assault team, if it were, behind Austin Metcalf. Which, of course, would justify him feeling threatened to the point of perhaps pulling a knife if he had one. We don't really know what happened from there because we don't have access to the video, or I haven't seen it. But it's safe to say, having some experience in high school fights, I would say that there was nothing nice being said, right? At any point, Austin Metcalf could have gone to his coach, and his coach shouldn't have been not there in the first place. Same thing with Carmelo Anthony. They should have been taking care of their teammates or their team and making sure that everyone was where they're supposed to be, rather than engaging each other for this long enough for this to escalate to the point that it did. Anyways, so this turns out to be something that's very possibly not murder, actually. There's just not enough there to prove intent for murder. Not to mention, this is sort of circumstantial, but not to mention that all I've heard is there was one stab wound with a knife that was sold to him at less than 5.5 inches, which, because it's so easy to get, you would assume that regulation size would have something to do with its lethality. So, it's not like he's, fucking shanked him a bunch of times. He stabbed him once. And, there's three, so essentially his defense is going to come down to three things. And it's the litmus test to prove self-defense in the state of Texas. So we don't have stand your ground law in Texas. It's more like baked into the cake when it comes to just our general self-defense laws. And in Texas, you don't have any obligation to retreat. Say that again. You do not have an obligation to retreat from a threat. Doesn't mean you can, aggressively assert yourself. It just means that if a threat is present, you are not obliged by law. It's not incumbent on you to get up and flee. Okay, and he didn't, so he's well within his rights there. The second one is proportionality. This is the one he's going to have a hard time with. Proportionality has to do with, is your force used to defend yourself proportionate to the force being used to wield the threat? In this case, Austin did not have a knife. He just had his hands and, buddies, I suppose. So through the eyes of the court, I just don't see, I think that's going to be one that he misses. And then the third one is would a reasonable person in the same situation fear for their lives or fear for their own, bodily well-being? And I think that if you put yourself in his shoes, you could see that regardless of how stubborn you may be or whether or not you should be in that place or not, which we now know he has a justification to be there under extenuating circumstances, and the fact, he still is going to fear for his life regardless of how tough he's acting or whatever. And so the fact that this kind of dust up turned into something much more serious is not all that surprising. But he's still culpable, right? This is going to be pled down to manslaughter, I think. So there's just no intent for murder. I don't know why they brought those charges. I mean, they seem overboard or overzealous. So, all right, shut up. Sorry about that. Yeah, so I don't see this being a murder. This is strange, actually. I mean, if there's anything weird about this case, it's the fact that they decided to slap him with a murder charge, because it's a pretty clear-cut case, just a standard case of self-defense, or not self-defense, of manslaughter. So, you know, it's a lot better than murder. You know what I mean? But, you know, he did choose to stab him with a knife, and unfortunately, given the law, you know, proportionality wise, he's gonna probably have to eat that one. But let me know what you think. As always, drop your comments below. You know, I don't know everything. I'm just gathering it like you are. So let me know if this opened anybody's eyes or not, or if y'all have some other information, throw it my way. As always, it's Poofy Man. Until next time.
Dallas, the home of the killers. Welcome to Dallas, sharks and gorillas, the girls, they going harder than. Welcome to Dallas, we lost some legends. Welcome to Dallas, we're hood, you reppin', be careful. You know the rest, be steady.